Ghost flavor.
Yeah. Is it good?
Dude, it feels like a basketball. I think it is like I didn't, but it has a basketball, and I was like, it's peach, and I love peach.
It's timely, bro. March Madness.
I didn't know that. I don't follow sports, so my wife's like, I'm like, just why is it a basketball? Like I'm mind blown, like with the basketball thing. I don't see the correlation. She's like, March Madness, and I'm like, okay, babe, you're talking to somebody that like it has no, I don't look at March as March Madness. March is like blossoms, things blossoming.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
Tornado season, apparently.
Oh, yeah.
Dude, I got sucked up the other day by a tornado.
What?
Just kidding. Ready to roll?
Yeah, let's get it going.
What is up, everybody? This is Joe Adams, and welcome to the Relentless Pursuit Podcast. What we do on this podcast is bring guests from all different backgrounds, all different walks of life to share their journey and everything along the way that led them to where they're at today. We're here to connect. We're here to make an impact, and that is what we do. So if that is for you, like, subscribe, all those wonderful things. And if that is not for you, I don't know what your problem is, but it's time to jump on board. Thank you. But without further ado, I would love to introduce today's guest for the second time. Part 2 with Mr. Paul Tennison.
Good to be here.
Good to have you, man.
Yeah.
If you haven't heard the first part of his story, check it out on the one previous to this one. Thank you. But Paul, welcome, man.
Good to be back.
Yeah, good to have you back, dude. We covered quite a bit last time.
Absolutely.
A lot of your journey. You know, growing up, going through West Point, some military time.
That's right.
And yeah, tell us about life. Just, you know, some changes since last time.
Yeah.
And then we'll dive it back into your story.
Yeah. So one of the stories I told, I remember because before this, we listened back to a little portion of it, was about my time in Korea as an active duty Army officer. I talked about the story about one of my soldiers, Ortiz, acting all crazy.
Yep.
And, you know, that's the kind of thing that you experience every once in a while as a military officer, is that every once in a while people just acting crazy.
Yeah.
So
even officers be acting crazy sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll think of an example or two as we're going through here where officers are acting a little crazy, and I'll throw that in there.
Yeah, for sure.
So we finished I know we talked about my time in Korea, so we'll jump to my time in Germany and kind of the time when I decided to make the transition to get out of the military.
Okay.
So I'd say, you know, when I went into it at first at West Point, I really had envisioned myself as a career military officer, thinking I was going to do 20 years, you know, maybe longer. But I think the reality of being at West Point during a time of war, and then, you know, serving during a time of war and having people I know be killed or seriously injured in combat and training accidents and that sort of thing, just, you know, eventually my thought of self-preservation or, you know, this isn't really where I want to spend my entire life was taking hold. In addition to the political game, you know, I really didn't anticipate military officer career path being as political as it is. I think you're actually more beholden to your bosses in the military than you are in corporate America, in my experience. And one of the reasons for that, if you don't have military experience, is because in the military, your bosses write your evaluation. So if they don't like you, they can put in there, Paul does some questionable things. You know, Paul's not ready for the next level. Don't promote Paul. Well, if they do that, Paul's in big trouble, because the way it works as a military officer is pretty much everybody gets promoted the first time. But then every rank structure, less and less people get promoted, because you can't have 10,000 generals, but you can have 100,000 lieutenants.
And you can't just go to the top of the chain of command and be like, that guy's a hater. They'll be like, shut up. You know what I'm saying?
Well, actually, the way it works is the Army board system is a random group of people in Washington, D.C., so it's not going to be people that know me personally, generally speaking.
So how do you even bypass like what they're saying?
Exactly. So you really can't. So the system is set up in such a way that, like, you don't learn this when you're in the officer candidate pipeline. No one comes up to you and be like, hey, you realize as an officer that you really have to be on good graces with your boss and your boss's boss. It's like something that you learn, you know, through experience. It's not something that they really teach you. It's more of like the first time you're doing your eval and you're looking at it and you're like, okay, my boss said this about me and my boss's boss said this about me. But I'm like, my boss's boss says this about 40 different people. How well does he know me to make this evaluation?
Yeah.
And does he really have my best interests at heart, or is he more motivated on what he's focused on? And so an example I could bring up from my time in Korea, my battalion commander, who was my senior rater, so boss's boss, is a lieutenant colonel and an armor officer. And I know he got promoted to colonel while he was still active duty, even though the reality was he wasn't a good dude to work for. And one of the reasons he wasn't a good dude to work for is because he just didn't set clear expectations a lot of the time. And he would just lash out at the staff when, from my vantage point, it was like, well, if you explained what you wanted, we would have given you what you wanted. Like, that's our job as a staff, is to help the commander do things. But because he wasn't a good communicator, he couldn't tell us what he wanted on the front end. So what happened was midway through, he'd be like, you guys are not doing this right. I'm really angry now because you guys are not doing this right. We'd be like, wait a minute, man. You didn't tell us what you wanted.
Yeah. Where's the communication at?
Exactly. And so one time I had to plan this event, which was just a static display. So it was just, we're going to put some tanks out here. We're going to put some vehicles. And the military family members, the military community, whoever's there in Korea can come by and see this stuff. And because of the way it was communicated to me, and I asked 3 different people for their input. So it wasn't that I didn't try to do the right thing. I asked people, hey, what does the commander want for this? And they're like, well, the commander's going to want you to use the old tanks because the new tanks are currently being used for training, so they're not available. And so I asked multiple people. And then I had to put together a presentation for the commander to review about this. And he looked at it, and the first thing he said was, why are we using the old tanks? And I was like, because that's what everybody told me when I asked them what you wanted.
Yeah.
And then basically it turned into him being like, well, you need to fix this. This is messed up. And I was like, well, sir, I need your guidance or your intent. And he took it as, so now you're telling me I need to do your job? And I was like,
that's not what I said.
not only is that not what I said, but you're turning this around on me.
Yeah.
When all I'm doing is saying, hey, I went and asked people. I asked I'm trying to remember what the guy's duty title was, like the senior master gunner. So he's like the senior enlisted guy that's like the specialist that knows everything about the tanks.
Okay.
And his job at the battalion headquarters is to kind of be over in charge of all the training for the tanks. And
almost like an E8 or something, maybe?
Yes,
okay.
He was an E8. So he is a very senior enlisted dude who's been in the Army for 20 years at that point in time.
Okay, it's like a senior master sergeant for
exactly.
Air Force. Yeah.
That's exactly the equivalent. So I'm asking him, hey, man, what does the commander want here? And you would assume that he would know. And I just went with what he told me. I asked my boss, who's a captain, hey, is this what the commander's going to want? And he's like, well, I don't know. Ask the master gunner. Which is who I asked, So it's, and that's really all because I'm not going to go interrupt the commander for his day and ask him. And then it just turned into some weird thing where the executive officer at the end was making a joke. And he's like, next time I need to ask the commander something, I'm going to get Tennison to go in there and ask him for me.
Hell yeah.
It's like, go task the commander to do something for me.
So it played out.
Yeah, well, and then this same guy, he decides when it's the evaluation time that none of the artillery officers deserve a high rating. They all deserve a center of mass rating. And I was talking to him about it, and I'm like, well, there's 4 of us, though, so couldn't whichever one of us performed the best get a above average rating?
Mm-hmm.
And his response was, no, because all of my platoon leaders work harder than you do. And the platoon leaders are armor officers or infantry officers. We're artillery officers. So he's basically just telling us, you're up the creek without a paddle just because of the branch or the specialty that you are, that you chose, not knowing that you would then be put somewhere in the military and be told your ceiling of your evaluation is center.
Yeah, that's shitty.
Exactly. And so that was like my first experience with an evaluation, and it was me and all 3 of the other artillery officers that were in his unit all got a center of the road evaluation, which means that for future promotions, it's a hindrance to us because nobody's getting the top rating.
Interesting. So, the ranking system is a bit off. Yeah, I guess would you say like compared to other branches, would you say it's optimal or would you say it's like it needs some work?
Well, it's just what it is it makes the system so much more political in that you have to please your boss and your boss's boss. Yeah. And to some extent, that makes sense in the military that you want the chain of command to be like
you want to be likable.
Yeah, you want to get along with the people you're working for sure. But it almost makes it to where if you're more buddy-buddy with your boss than the other people, not that you're more professional, not that you're fitter, not that you're smarter.
Then you're a brown noser, though, to them.
Well, but if you do it successfully, if you're just good enough at like, hey, I get what the boss wants done, and the boss looks at it as like, well, Tennison's the best because he gets the stuff done that I want done, and I don't have to tell him. But really what's going on is kind of more brown-nosing. Well, he's going to get the best evaluation, not whoever's actually the best officer, Yeah. And so that's I think the problem. Now, is there really a way you can prevent this or make it a better system? Probably not. But my point with it is it makes it political in a way where at some point, like if you're pretty smart when you're doing it, like by the time I was a captain, I realized how the game was played enough to where I knew when I was doing my evaluations, all I would have to do was flag one of the things in someone below me's evaluation, and that would basically mean they would not get promoted. And you don't have to do it in like a hateful way. You don't say this is the worst person ever. You just say
it sucks.
You just say they lack loyalty in certain aspects, or they lack decision making in certain regards, or something. You just say they lack something somewhere in the report, and then when they go to get promoted at the next step, they're not going to get promoted. So on one hand, it's good that there's so much power, in the ranks to kind of police their own. But my point with it is that it makes it risky to have a career as a military officer because at any one point in time, you could have a boss who's an asshole, who's not a good dude, but he was right place, right time, and got promoted to lieutenant colonel, whatever. And now he's in charge of you. And if he just doesn't like you because, he's Catholic and you're not, or because he's a Broncos fan and you're a Packers fan, like it doesn't matter what the thing is. If he just doesn't like you, you're really in a difficult position because as you go up and up in the ranks, each evaluation matters more and more because, I was able to study it a little bit while I was at West Point. Like I could get access to information that would tell me what the promotion rates were on active duty for things. So I could look at the field artillery pipeline while I was still at West Point and see that like 96% of people get promoted from second lieutenant to first lieutenant. 91% of people get promoted from first lieutenant to captain.
Okay.
67% of people get promoted from captain to major, and then it's like maybe 50% get promoted from major to lieutenant colonel, maybe 40% from lieutenant colonel to colonel, maybe 30% from colonel to one-star general. Yeah. And then once you're at that level, then it's basically all political.
Oh, 100%.
At the general officer level. Yeah. So realizing that, it really just, I think when you really think about it and put a intellectual thought to it, you realize that you're putting all your time, energy, and effort into something that at any one point in time, you can make one mistake and then it could be gone. Yeah. And I think that the reality is that people in the corporate world, they're not really, treated the same way. They make one mistake and they're generally still fine. Yeah. I mean, you look at our politicians, a lot of the more successful politicians we have right now, maybe some at the highest levels have had failed businesses, have, had hundreds, maybe thousands of lawsuits filed against them, have had, have been married and divorced 10 times.
They're okay.
Exactly. They have affairs while they're in office and nothing happens. Yeah. But military officer, you do those same sort of things and you can get, booted to the door. And if you don't have that 20 years, now you don't have any retirement benefits from it. So it's at some point in time, it becomes a risky game. And I actually kind of saw it firsthand in that in about 2014, what had happened historically in the United States military was pre 9/11, we were kind of a smaller military. After 9/11, we ramped up and grew. And then we deployed people to Iraq, Afghanistan, had those wars going on for a long time. As a result of that, right at the time I was at West Point, 2006, 2010, we were gearing up more and more people. One of the ways you do that on a system basis is you reduce the standards for enlistment. So before, maybe before our standard was, hey, you could only be 40 years old max. Well, now we really need people. You can be 45 max. Before, you couldn't have any, crimes on your record at all at some point in time in the peacetime army. But then in the wartime army, well, you could have one felony. As long as it's one. Yeah, one. So those standards, they grow and flex in order to change the recruitment stuff. That's why I'm always very skeptical when I hear in the news that they're like, the Army met its recruitment goals this year. I'm like, Yeah, the reason they met the goals is because you reduced the goal of what they wanted to grow by 40,000 people.
Yep.
So all you got to do is move the goalposts, and then you can say we achieved our directive, which is actually what the Army did this last year, which I can actually say now that I'm not in the Army. You know?
You called them out.
That's right.
I mean, hey, but that's just the truth, you know? It's
Exactly.
interesting. It's interesting when you think about it from that perspective, though, because they kind of just, they say something, everyone's like, oh, yeah, hell yeah. But there's, all it takes is a change in wording.
Yeah, so 2014, the time I started to think about it when I was active duty in Germany, is the time when some of these captains that had 14 years in the military got their pink slips and were told, "You're done. We're basically relief in causing you." And the timing of it was wild because I was reading these stories in Army Times magazine about it. Some of these captains were like currently deployed, like currently commanders of units, and they were like, "Don't care. You're gone."
No shit.
It's really interesting that they were like, we can put our faith and trust and confidence in you to lead deployed soldiers. And then they said, 5 minutes later, oh, never mind, you're done.
It's kind of messed up, too. Yeah, because they're like, you probably got guys there that like truly want to be there. Like,
well, it brings me up to the story of my friend Andrew Weber, who I met when we were active duty Army officers in Germany. He was a really good guy, and he was we were talking about evaluations and things, and he told me, I know I can't get promoted to major, and the reason I can't get promoted to major is because someone stole $10,000 in SURF funds out of my desk. And the way he relayed the story to me was like, I was locking this stuff in the desk drawer of my office because I didn't have like a lock box in my room that I wanted to trust. I thought it was the most secure thing I had. But I was working with a bunch of Afghanis, so I'm sure somebody at some point saw me locking it and thought there's something in there. And then one day I come to work and the $10,000 is gone. Someone just took it. And, he didn't have cameras or anything, so there was really nothing to be done. So he just had to report it up the chain of command. Well, they proceeded to put that in his evaluation that he lost $10,000 in funds. And that dropped him down from the, great evaluation he would have had to a center of the road or lower. And because they checked the box that certain way, he knew that when they did the majors promotion board, they would not promote him.
yeah, he was like out. Yep.
Yeah, he's like, I'm out. Well, so he goes to law school, and then I actually learned later that he died in Ukraine. He joined the volunteer force to fight for the Ukrainians in response to Russia's invasion. And so that, obviously sad that he was killed in action there. But to me, that it's a strange, cycle of things that happen in the world, because if that Afghani didn't steal the $10,000 out of his thing, he probably would still be in the U.S. Army.
Interesting.
That wouldn't have happened. But just, conversations with him and others made me realize that, if you're just in the wrong place, the wrong time as an officer, and other examples are, every once in a while you have soldiers do really crazy things, like, someone kills someone or seriously injures them, or someone does something very unsafe.
Yeah.
If you're the commander, even if you weren't there, you can be like, okay, now we're firing everybody in this chain of command because this really bad thing happened. So if you're just wrong place, wrong time, and I heard of it happen. I heard of it happen where in an artillery unit, the unit I came to in Korea, the story before I got there was, last year, one of our gunners, one of our artillery pieces shot, and they totally messed up because what they did is when they laid the gun, they loaded it in there, and you're supposed to then push another button to where it'll load it to the correct elevation. But he had it on the elevation to throw the round in, forgot to push the other button. So now where he fired it went 4,000 meters from where it was supposed to go, and it impacted closer to the brigade talk where the commander, the colonel, was physically located, and it impacted 600 meters away from where he was.
Oh.
Yeah, and they're like, this is unacceptable. So we're firing everybody from this rank on down. So
And it's like dudes that it's one person that made a mistake and they just go after everybody.
Exactly.
It's interesting. Well, there's a story. I don't know if you heard about the nuke that was flown over the States, the Air Force, a while back.
That's pretty epic mess up there.
Yeah, but obviously it's like, who do you even go after for that? And apparently a lot of people got fired in that ordeal.
I can see it.
Imagine so. I mean, but it's like, how do you make that kind of mistake? How do you jack that up? That's a nuke.
Well, a somewhat equivalent one in the Army I can think of is there was one soldier who killed another one and then hid her body in Fort Hood. And I think That happened around the same time that something else happened that was negative, and they basically decided to fire everyone from the colonel on down in the organization. So you could have really been wrong place, wrong time in that one, and it had nothing to do with, you personally.
Yeah.
I mean, there were other problems going on, but
Hood's has kind of a rap for like a lot of different things going on.
well, as an attorney, one time I actually got several phone calls from guys who were from some base and they were deployed in Poland. And what happened was a bunch of them got drunk and went to a strip club. And this one of the officers there had apparently gotten drugged, and he spent like 10 grand at the strip club, and then they couldn't find him the next day. And so they spent like a day looking for this dude, and he was a major, so that's not the kind of stuff you're supposed to be having happening at that level. And then because of that, everybody started hearing about it. There was an Army Times article, and then they decided to prosecute like everybody that went there. So it was like they're going to get you in trouble even if your only crime was you were there.
Damn, you're like, someone's like, dude, I didn't even remember seeing the guy. Given all these events, the politics, this, that, and the other, I'd imagine that had some kind of influence on your transition out of the military and where you wanted your path to go.
Yeah, so I just started thinking like, I can't do this for forever. Even if I made the active duty thing for a career time period, I mean, I still wouldn't do it more than 20 years or so anyway. That's the main reason people stay for 20 is just so they can get the retirement. So, I would still have been 42 years old and then transitioning from the military to do something else. And I'm thinking, well, what skill, am I learning while I'm in the military? What's a good thing for me to transition to? And I thought about what I liked about being a field artillery officer was solving the puzzle. The aspect of like, I need to figure out how to incorporate all of this data and information and put it into our plan to achieve fire for effect on the enemy, make it part of the synchronization plan. But, it's not like the artillery skills translates directly into some civilian job. You're not going to go be a civilian artillery person. That doesn't exist. So it's like maybe you can take the leadership and, try to go into corporate America on that route. It's like, or I could develop another skill. So what I started thinking about, what I do well as an artillery officer is solving problems, right? So I'm communicating, I'm figuring out what the problem is, coming up with a solution. And I thought being an attorney would be a good similar thing. I've always been a voracious reader, able to read much faster than the average person, has been a skill of mine for a long time period. I think because I started reading novels when I was like 12 and I developed that skill. So I could read, I'd read hundreds of pages a day as a child. So reading hundreds of pages a day as a law student and as an attorney didn't seem that overwhelming to me because I knew I could do the volume. It's just a matter of obviously reading for entertainment. It's a little bit more just I'm enjoying turning the pages versus reading for education is more of like do I need to underline this part or star this or how does this connect to the things I'm learning? So it's a little bit different, but obviously being able to read quickly, already having that skill, I knew law school would be good. And then my wife at the time actually started thinking about going to law school. So she took the LSAT. She didn't do as well on it as she wanted to, so she wasn't going to be able to get into any prestigious law schools. I took the LSAT without doing any prep work, and the first practice test without doing any preparation, just took it, and got like 50 percentile. So without doing anything, I was already landing in the average. And then I said, well, I know I'm a good test taker whenever I actually study for the test, whenever I figure out how the methods and things work. So if I actually, buy a study guide book and spend some time practicing in it, I'll score much higher than the 50th percentile. Because 50th without any prep work means, you're in a good position.
For sure.
And then I was just thinking about, what does lawyers do? I envisioned the idea of, meeting with a client, you're talking to them, you're coming up with a solution to the problem. And that in that way, it's a lot like the artillery framework of like, we need to plan this mission. Where are we going to put targets in order to achieve this objective? What are the controls and the different measures is kind of the same thing as what are the limits of the law, what things are legal, illegal, what are the arguments you can make.
Super cool.
So I thought that the two really would kind of line up pretty well. And then took the LSAT the first time and did well with it. And then the Army actually had a program called the Funded Legal Education Program where they pay for your law school. You just owe them more time as an Army officer, but you would be serving as an Army officer in the legal capacity.
Yeah.
So my thought was that would be the way to transition it to where I could still do 20 years in the military and then get out. Well, fortunately, in hindsight, that never worked out. I never made it into the funded legal education program. But by trying to do that, I got accepted to 10 different law schools. So there was only one law school I applied to that I didn't get into. And I didn't apply to the top 5 schools or anything like that. But, I mean, I got into Vanderbilt. I got into...
You got Harvard. You went to Harvard.
No, Vanderbilt, which I guess is kind of the Harvard of the South.
No, that's awesome. I mean, I think that's cool.
We're consistently ranked in the top 20 in most rankings, and there's I don't know 100, 150 law schools in America at least. So there's definitely a lot that are lower ranked than Vanderbilt.
Yeah, for sure.
William and Mary was probably my second choice. They're kind of generally considered like a tier below that. And then I had other schools like Arkansas, Texas Tech, Michigan State that I was accepted to that I would have probably got a large scholarship to go there, which would have been helpful. But kind of my thought was Vanderbilt made the most sense because it's known as being a national school, so you're not really limited to only working in Tennessee. And since I'm not from Tennessee, I didn't know for sure that I was going to want to stay here after finishing.
Did you have to send like a video
school
to the board, to get them to accept you? Did they
Vanderbilt?
Did they just accept you for your looks?
No, it's just a...
The girl in Legally Blonde did it. She had a Harvard ball. They were like, we need...
Well, that might work.
My wife and I watched that like the other day, and
just
for some reason, when you're talking about this, it made that scene click when those old dudes are like, yeah, we need her to come to this school. Anyways...
That's funny.
Off subject, yeah, I know. Like me watching Legally Blonde, it's catchy. Anyways,
my favorite legal movie actually in this vein is My Cousin Vinny.
I love My Cousin Vinny.
Yeah, because to me, My Cousin Vinny is like this guy's going through
good.
and it's like these are the Alabama rules of civil procedure. It's like, yep, that's actually the way it works. There actually are rules of civil procedure, and there are judges that like to very rigorously enforce them, and then there's other judges that I've experienced that they don't care about the rules at all. They just want to get this done and move on to the next thing. And so actual practice of law, sometimes the My Cousin Vinny experience is kind of how it works. But in terms of the evidentiary stuff too, it actually is kind of how it works in the movie.
Such a good movie.
In terms of presenting like the tire marks are this and that type of tire can't be this car because this car doesn't have that wide of tires and stuff. Like I've seen in litigation accident reconstructionists that try to tell you how fast the motorcycle was going at the time of the accident and that sort of thing.
When I had my motorcycle accident, that was a big thing when it came to, there's a lawsuit, obviously. I had like $500,000 in medical bills.
Yes.
So that's got to be pursued, and my attorneys hired it was some small town guys from Manchester, man. They crushed it. But
nice.
They hired a guy that actually did engineering for certain bikes for Harley Davidson.
Yeah.
So he was like, this bike exists because this guy was like hands-on with some of the key components, right? Which is cool. So he did a whole reconstruction, was able to like tell exactly the speed I was going, calculate the car, exactly where I landed. And I was like, dude, that's so freaking, all this math, shit that's like, have fun with that. But it's just really cool because there's a lot that goes into that, man. Mm-hmm. Figuring that out.
Well, and today they can even do like the drone flights over the section of the road that the accident happened to get an aerial view of everything. It's like the technology that exists for some of these things these days is wild when you think about compared to My Cousin Vinny and pre that time where there was never any video evidence of anything. Yeah, because nobody had cell phones with cameras, carrying around them that they're recording stuff or just the car accidents that occur inside a parking lot. Sometimes the parking lots have cameras and things.
That is true.
So you get
that
today.
Stuff.
Today you can have more evidence, and also like the truckers. Today, I think almost all the trucking companies require there to be cameras. I know the Amazon delivery vans, they have to have cameras because I've defended them in lawsuits before. So the evidentiary things change.
Those are huge lawsuits too.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, but the movie My Cousin Vinny does demonstrate that pretty well in terms of they make the argument at the big trial, right? And it goes well. He exonerates his buddies that didn't kill anybody because when you watch the actual movie at the beginning, you see like they just go into the convenience store and then leave. They didn't do anything. But unfortunately for them, wrong place, wrong time, and they're from out of state, so it's real easy to blame them versus
They're
figuring
outsiders
out
too,
who it is.
small
Yeah,
town.
rural Alabama
Yep.
outsider, which I kind of experienced the rural outsider Tennessee thing in some of the cases I did. You know, being the attorney from Brentwood or Nashville or whatever. You know, I can get a little bit of a cold shoulder from everybody if I'm out in Dixon or wherever. You know, I try to be friendly and find a thing to connect people on. Usually the veteran status things.
Yeah,
that
that
I
helps
go with, but
for sure.
and then being like, well, I'm from Oklahoma, so that I try to be like, it's kind of like Tennessee.
Yeah, we get tornadoes.
Yeah, a lot of the country music stars. Some of them are from Oklahoma.
Yeah, come on, guys.
We gave you Carrie Underwood. Come on.
Help us out. No, I do have to throw out my favorite part. I don't know why it always cracks me up. The one part from My Cousin Vinny when he hears like the owl in the cabin and he comes running out with a shotgun. He's like, what the fuck was that? And he's like, starts shooting. And it's just like an owl in the tree. It's like nothing crazy. He just freaks out because he's from the city and he hears like a noise that's so foreign. I don't know why that part always makes me laugh so hard.
Well, I think because it does such a great job of showing the city versus rural dynamic. Right?
Yeah,
That just life is so different in the city versus urban area versus rural areas.
Yeah.
The movie does a good job of portraying that.
Yeah, that part
That
cracks me
scene
up.
is funny. Absolutely.
Anyways.
So, but yeah, going to law school, I thought it would just kind of tie in well with the skills I already have. Teach me a skill that would be a lifelong skill because obviously attorneys practice, a long time.
Yeah.
I actually had a trial against a guy that's like 80 years old, still practicing law. My bar number is like 36,000 in Tennessee. His bar number was 900. He was the 900th attorney in Tennessee.
Dang.
Yeah, and which was like 60 years ago. So it's pretty wild that the guy was still practicing law, especially
That's
because
crazy.
while we were waiting for our trial, dude was sitting at the table just like this for an hour, just
Get him a little
he
shut
was
eye.
he was getting his nap in the bench there waiting
Meditating.
for our
Just getting ready. He's like, that's what he does.
One of the funniest things though was I was trying the case against him, and it's his client's testimony. This is a post-divorce custody case, and we're talking about financial stuff. And his client had redacted the documents, and I could see on the screen where he was showing the documents. And I just objection, Your Honor, this is an adulterated document. How do we know this is the original? This is redacted. And he's like, this document's redacted? Because he can hardly see because he's 80 years old, so he's not even understanding what's going on. And he's like, did you redact this to his client during the middle of the trial? So that was kind of humorous. But
He's like, damn it, man. That's so funny.
damn it, you weren't supposed to do that. And the way it goes in litigation too is they were supposed to, give us those documents before the trial anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So the judge wasn't going to let that come in at the last minute. And the trial went pretty well for my client on that one. So I was happy. So. Going up against someone who's in their 80s usually isn't a bad thing for you as a young attorney. You just notice that they seem to cut a lot of corners on the rule stuff because they think that the judge is going to give them some leeway because they've been in the judge's courtroom for 20 years.
Yeah. And then it doesn't always work out that way.
It doesn't always, but sometimes the judge will throw them a bone on something that's not that controversial, that's a discretionary thing. The judge would be like, yeah, it's okay, you can do whatever, even though the rule says more of you're supposed to do X. And the judge would be like, okay, it's okay for you to do Y.
It's all
I've
good.
got some discretion here.
Yeah,
Yeah. Because the judges, they start to really understand, I think, after being on the bench for a while, like what decisions they can get away with versus what will be appealed, and the Court of Appeals will say that's a really bad thing. So there's some things they just know, like they're like, oh, even though the rules don't say this, I can do X, and it's not a problem.
So they're like, if it's too obvious, it's like, hey, you're my boy, but like, come on, don't be foolish.
Exactly.
Yeah, like I want to throw you a bone, but that's like too big of a bone. You're screwing up,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's kind of wild the way it
Well,
works.
it's like with anything, man. I think, that's the human aspect, right? There's always going to be that space of error. It could be good or bad, right?
Yeah.
But there's always going to be that human aspect to anything political, whether it's cops, and how they handle their business, or judges or attorneys, or even who are the people that are sitting there in the courthouse.
Like the bailiff or the
people that are,
administrative people.
No, the people that are like the jury.
Oh, the jury.
Yeah.
The jury's gonna have the ultimate say.
Yeah. So you got all these those human factors,
Right.
But and sometimes it's like really messed up how the human factors come into play.
Honestly, it's funny the jury stuff because I think in the one, like, I know kind of what's behind the curtain on the attorney side, like what you think about when you're selecting a jury. Because I've done it as an attorney, like done a jury trial. So when you look at it, you really are basically like, I want jurors that are most like my client, and I want to exclude all the jurors that are not like my client. And it's funny because the actual law is you're not supposed to discriminate based on sex, based on race. But the reality is what people do is they do just enough that they can get away with.
Yeah.
So if you get 4 peremptory challenges, meaning you can remove 4 jurors for any reason, if your client is a white person who you think is not going to relate well to a black jury, you're going to use at least 2 of those on black jurors, but you'll find 2 white jurors that you also think don't mesh with your client for whatever reason.
It's interesting you say that. So when I had my wreck, it being so severe, like there was just like, hey, we may have to, there was the option of going to court.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, unfortunately, courtrooms are typically biased against motorcycles.
Right.
And then you also look how you do, and my attorneys were just honest. They're like, that could cause a problem,
Yes.
So we do want to handle this outside of court if we can,
Right.
in the best way possible. And I was like, people judgmental, man, it's messed up, but like, honestly, I get it. Like at the same time, I'm not a fool, I know how I may look, or like that motorcycles a lot of times are at fault,
Sure.
because people are hauling ass and this and that. So
The prejudice is that they're speeding, right? The juries.
Oh, yeah.
A lot of the juries be like, well, I see motorcycle speeding, so he's probably speeding.
yeah. Well, there's, because I was on a Harley, but there was somebody that was a witness that was like, that bike was flying. I had just a really loud Harley, but like the truth is I was actually going like 1 mile per hour over the speed limit according to like the reconstruction. So,
Yeah.
but people just, they hear it and they see it and they're like, oh my God, they put 2 and 2 together. It's just like that bike was going 105 through here,
Yeah.
when they were way off. So it is interesting when you hear about that. I don't know. I think being an attorney would be a very interesting thing, man, because you got to be analytical and you're probably paying attention to so many different things,
Yeah, the challenging part for me is trying to think about all the different things versus staying with the idea of like, I've got a script or I've got like these bullet point topics that I want to stick to. That's always kind of the balance for me when I'm in court, is like, how much do I script this versus how much do I freestyle it, depending on what it is, because the longer and longer I've done whatever it is, like if it's something easy, like a divorce final hearing where it goes the same way every time, where you just ask your client, what's your name? What's your spouse's name?
Yeah.
Do you have property? Do you have kids? Are you asking the judge to approve this? That's not real hard. You don't really need a script for it, although it might not be a bad idea to have all of the different bullet points so you can put a check next to it as you ask it, so
For
you
sure.
don't forget something. But, if you forget to say one thing, the judge is usually going to just say like, and what about this? Because the judge also wants the final hearing to be successful, because the judge wants the case off of his docket too. So they're generally not going to be fighting the attorneys on it. Versus if you got to go in there and argue that this judge is biased against something and you've got to ask the judge to recuse themselves. Now you're doing something that could seem like it's a personal attack, so you want to be very tactful about how you present it. So you can, after a while, the experience, you realize like, is this something that I need to be overly prepared for versus not? The first time you do anything as an attorney, you want to be really prepared for it, maybe have some cases or rules that are going to back your position on what you're going to argue on. But if you've argued this same motion 10 times in front of this same judge, you can basically go in there without vigorously preparing for that aspect, because you already have the experience. So you don't really have to, prep for it the same way. Yes, that's definitely something you learn as an attorney.
That's really cool, man. I do want to ask you some more, obviously more along the lines of that.
Yeah.
But I do want to know, like, okay, you decide to go to Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
That was pretty much a no-brainer. There was no, like, I guess it was just like, yeah, this is where I'm going to go. Pretty easy decision, you think? And what was that transition like, though? You applied while you were still an officer?
Yes.
Okay, so what was that transition like, I guess, I'm curious, from, like, being an officer to going to Vanderbilt into law school?
Yeah, so it was definitely a big transition. I was on active duty in Germany, and kind of like our conversation before, I just realized, I'm not gonna do this for forever. And I was already accepted to 10 different law schools, but I was not accepted to the funded legal education program. So I couldn't stay active duty and go to the law schools I've already been accepted to. So what I did instead was I finished my time in the military because my commitment was over, left active duty. I actually did decide to join the National Guard from Germany to join the Tennessee Army National Guard because they're like, we found a slot for you. It's in Winchester, Tennessee, which is not terribly far away from Nashville where you're moving to. Like, because, you're just doing 1 week in a month, 2 weeks in the summer, more or less, was the way it was sold to me. And you get to keep your insurance. You got to pay for it now. Active duty, it was free medical for you and your family. But now you got to pay for it. But it's still better than not having insurance because at the time I was married and my son was, he was born in 2012 and this is 2015. So he's only 3 years old. So he's young. So it would be wise to have insurance, on the kid while I'm going to law school.
Yeah.
So those were a lot of reasons why I was like, okay, well, and then also the other part of it was they were like, and we'll make your commitment where it's really short. Like you can just do a year and a half of this. And if you don't like it, you can leave. So that's obviously a good deal versus being like, you're stuck for 5 more years of doing something in the military. So all those reasons were good reasons why I was like, okay, I'll give the National Guard a shot. So left Germany on July 31st of 2015 and then started law school August 7th or something, 2015. So I had very little time. I actually moved to...
right into it.
Yeah. Actually moved to Hendersonville, which was terrible for the commuting. But when we were out there at the apartment, it was fine. It wasn't bad. It was just... I didn't realize at the time that it sounded much better on paper, only being 20 miles from where I was going to school. But I didn't realize that those 20 miles would be during rush hour. I would be driving all the time at a terrible time, and just got stuck on the roads for quite a bit of time. But, hey, it got me to where I needed to be. It was challenging, though, because my now ex-wife was also going to school at Belmont at the same time, and we had a young child. So we were both going to school full-time, and I was in the military part-time. So, yeah, it was tough to balance, like, studying for law school because most of my peers were single people that could go out and party, and then they'd be fine. Well, it's like, well, I got to go home and, spend time with my son.
Yeah.
And I've got to do my classes, something you can relate to
100%
from where you're at in life,
yeah.
I even took my son to like 10 different law school classes with me. And I remember one time I had him with like a tablet and his headset on. We were in the very back of the classroom and I guess he was watching something funny because he started laughing kind of out loud. It was loud enough that the professor looked over at him.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, hey, you gotta be quiet.
I know.
You can't be laughing. No laughing.
It's interesting. Well, I've seen actually that on campus at MTSU just a couple times. You do what you gotta do. I'm sure the professors show that grace. I've had to not go to class because maybe my wife's sick as hell. She's at home, but my daughter, she's like, I need help, and there's an exam. I'm like, listen, I got to go.
Yeah.
Take care of my daughter, and it's cool going back. I'm not gonna lie. Because I was always like, oh, my God, they're going to fail me because I'm, not showing up or I got some late days or whatever. And, honestly, all my professors are like, Joe, you got a lot going on. I was just honest, up front at the beginning. I was like, I run a business. I work all the time. I've got a newborn, all this stuff. They were like, just let us know, and we'll make sure you're squared away. We'll get you to take a test when you can take an exam or whatever it is. But, just heads up, we got you. And I was like, I thought that was cool.
Yeah.
It'd be one thing if I was a 20-year-old kid and I was hungover and I'm like, I'm not going to make the exam, but no, I got to do parent shit. And most of them could probably relate to that.
That's right.
So it is definitely, there's a benefit, I guess, going back. The pressure is, you want to do well, but the pressure is not as heavy because that grace is shown to you're dealing with life shit.
Yeah.
that's impactful. So
in my time at Vanderbilt Law School, 2015 and 2018, before that time period, it's really been known as more of a collegial atmosphere law school, not a competitive atmosphere law school. So I think really the competitive atmosphere law school was more the model in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And then it kind of transitioned to be more of a collaborative, the stories of the super competitive law school is they have an assignment, and the assignment back in the day in the library, you had to go get the physical books to find the citations to the case. So the guy that wanted to be first in the class would go grab the book and hide it, not put it back where everybody else in the class could find it. And this guy would, ace the test because he knew where the stuff was. And everyone else is like, where's this case? I can't find this case that I need for this thing. Because back in the day, they had to actually physically grab the books to find the citations. It's weird, the law citations where they have those numbers. That's what that actually means. Today, using it, people might not really understand because they're just using computers for everything versus physical. But the idea was back in the day, you had to go, oh, this says P2 third 7 or whatever.
Oh my
and
God.
you had to go find the book with that label, pull it out, find the page number. That's what that actually means. They still use that for legal citations today, but that's where it comes from. Is back in the day, they put it in a book.
Yeah, nowadays you don't have to go to the library to actually find that.
Exactly. So we still had like library classes in law school, but it's more them teaching us how to use the legal research software to find the things than go find the actual physical book. They still had the physical books, but why would you go find it when you can just type in the search, and as long as your parameters are correct, it pulls it up on your screen.
Yeah. So they got to, it's almost like, but you still need to make it competitive to a degree. So there's like, you got to get creative, I guess, to make people, because you want the best to get through. It's like, obviously it's easier to like utilize a software once you learn it, right? Because you're not hiding books, right? But at the same time, it's like, well, you can't just let everybody through just because they can easily get on software. So
yeah,
how do you differentiate? Does that make sense?
It does.
Like you want people to put in that effort still in just a different way.
Well, the reality is the way law school grading is done is much different than most college grading. So law school grading, a lot of the classes are 90% of your grade is the final exam.
Yeah.
10% of your grade is based on the class participation. So that can just be, does Paul raise his hand and say things in class that are helpful? Or it can be, do I like Paul, so I'm going to give him a plus? Or do I not like Paul, so I'm going to give him a minus? That's the way I think that the grading system for law school actually works. And they're supposed to grade the exams blind, not knowing who's the one that did this, and then they just use a number system to match it up. Numbers the professor doesn't know what the number correlates to. Yeah. And so the professor just has a stack of 100 exams and then just goes through each question and grades it A, B, C, D is kind of my theory on how they do it. I'm sure they can do it different ways, but if I was grading, the way I would do it is I would just say, this one's the best, this one's the worst, and then I would just put them in rank order.
Okay.
And I would say whoever did the best gets an A+, whoever did the worst gets a C, C-, C+, whatever, wherever you want to set the parameters, because the reality is that the average law school grade at Vanderbilt was really like a 3.2 at graduation is like the middle of the road.
Okay.
So it's a little bit inflated over what West Point was. West Point actually did their grades to where 3.0 was the middle.
Okay.
Which is interesting that they have that ability to control it, because most schools, I think, inflate grades because they realize that, having a higher GPA for their graduates is helpful for them in job applications.
Yeah.
So that's why I think a lot of the schools more are on that side. But my law school experience was overall positive. I made several friends that we would study together sometimes. And I didn't have the grades quite at the level I wanted. I had like a 3.2 after the first semester, but then I ended up graduating with a 3.5, so doing very well.
Nice.
Towards the top, third of the class.
How long did it take you to get through school?
It's 3 years.
3 years?
Yeah, so law school is 3 years. I did 3 years full time. And, at one point in time, I had 3 part-time jobs because I was doing the Army, and I was doing the Tennessee Army National Guard, and then I was doing Bloomberg Law, like rep, which was an easy job. They were just paying me to like sit at the table and talk to people about Bloomberg Law. It was cool.
Oh, yeah.
And then I forgot what the third job was. But anyways, I had a lot of stuff going on.
Dude, I love this one.
That's great.
I love Ghost Energy.
Nice.
Like, I love this. My favorite's the grape. But now this is my second fave.
That's cool.
Yeah. They are going to sponsor me, dude.
Oh, that's awesome.
No, I mean, I'm putting that out there.
Putting that into the universe.
All right, so back into it.
Yeah.
You're talking about school and the GPAs and all that. So,
sure. And
then we're going back into some of your cases and whatnot and kind of bringing it back to where you're at now.
Yeah, so let's talk more about law school a little bit. So like I was saying, the testing environment in law school is pretty stressful because you show up for your final exams and that's going to be 90% of your grade. So before that time period, what worked for me was I took handwritten notes in class, and after a while, I limited myself to 1 page of notes per day, because that way I didn't have so much to review when it was time to create an outline. So I would take my 1 page of handwritten notes, then when it was time to start outlining, so the first semester around Thanksgiving, because the tests were going to be in like early December, first week of December. So I'd take the outlining I would take the notes I had and I would type it up. So now I've gone through one method of brain by handwriting, one method of brain by typing, and I would try to kind of make connections between the different ones and the different things. And then what I like to do is create a playbook, which was a 1 page one side, 1 page the other side, very small summary. And then I had the longer outline, which was usually 10 to 20 pages for me of stuff. I would also find outlines from people from previous years from the same professor and review and make sure I wasn't missing gaps in information.
Yeah.
So those were the things I used to study, because most of my exams were actually open note exams. So you could have your book, but obviously you're not going to like go look in your book for a specific case when you've only got 3 hours for the whole test.
Yeah.
You need to already know that stuff. So that's what I put in the outline.
Okay.
Meaning, like, for every single case we covered in the class, I've got like at least a 2-line summary of what it's about.
Yeah.
So then I don't have to go look in the book for it, because in the exam you're writing. You know, that's what you should be doing. One of my distinct memories of law school is I was about 1 hour into a 3-hour exam. It was like the first or second exam I took in law school, and for some reason I just kind of looked up, and the way the spacing of the classroom was, you could kind of see the people below you. I mean, I wasn't like looking at their screen to see what they were doing. Plus, they give you different exams, like they mix up the questions, so you can't really copy off someone. But I just remember that for some reason, this person sitting below me, the screen kind of caught my eye because I noticed that it was blank. And I'm talking an hour into the exam where I've already written at least 1,000 words, maybe more, in the 1 hour. Because like I said, I'm a quick reader, so I get started quickly.
Yeah.
And I was just thinking, whoever that is, they got some problems coming. If they don't start writing something soon, they're going to fail this exam. And this is like our second exam of law school. So whoever that was, hopefully you passed. I don't know.
I think they're writing the whole thing down in their mind, and then once it stops, they go like, you never know.
It's so overwhelming, though. So I had this property, one of the first classes I had in law school. I remember the exam itself is 18 pages of material. So you got to read 18 pages and then write answers to these 18 pages worth of questions. And the final question was actually hilarious. So this is what this law professor put in his question. It was like, all right, James is engaged to Sally. James buys her a gift from Amazon. Amazon delivers it with a drone, but Sally has a goat, and the goat takes the box that the drone delivered, throws it in the backyard. From the backyard, Smith, who's walking by, picks up the box, takes it to his property. Somehow Smith misplaces the box. It gets in a river, and it flows downriver to John's property. John picks up the box, gives it to Serena to propose to her. Who owns the item? And so you had to do an analysis of each person, but at that time I had like 15 minutes left, so I was just like, James, does he own the item or not? Like one sentence, you know, and that was the way I did it, because I was running out of time. I still got an A on the exam, but I can imagine some of the people, you know, if they got to that question when they only had 5 minutes left, they'd be like, I don't have time to write all this. You know, I just ran out of time.
Yeah, you just kind of got to like pull something out of your ass. Roll with it. That's kind of what you got to do. It's like get creative as fast as you can. And
that's why the quick reading, quick typing abilities was really helpful, because if I didn't have that, I would have definitely ran out of time on that exam.
Interesting.
That was one that was like that. The other thing about it is that it's kind of stressful in law school in that you finish all your exams the first week of December. You don't get all your grades back until like the second week of January. So there's like a month or so where you're in complete uncertainty, where you're like,
that's stressful.
If you don't manage your own, self well, you can get into the like, let me rehash this exam and think about what I should have done differently, what I did.
Spiral.
You can spiral. But the other thing about it is it doesn't really make any sense to go through the analysis, because you still have no idea whether you nailed the answer or completely missed. Yeah. And even when they give you your grade, you really have no idea. Because they did like exam review, but exam review, depending on the professor, was they would either just pick the best student answer for each question, or they would write their own preferred answer and give you that. So either way, you could be like, I said X, they said Y. What's the difference? I mean, I did exam review the first year because I was trying to figure out, how I could improve, and I think it did help me some. But, it's still sort of an enigma.
Yeah.
And it's such a subjective grading system, just who wrote this best. I guess in theory, they're preparing you for the bar exam, which is a kind of similar experience.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's intense.
You got 1 day of typing essays, and then you got 1 day of 200 multiple choice questions. At least that was the Tennessee bar exam when I took it in 2018. So it's probably still very similar to that today because they don't change things very rapidly in the legal environment. The main stressful thing about it, though, is just like preparing, all your energy and effort to be in 2 days of exams, 12 hours of exams is like, 3+ years of education. You're like, okay, now I've got to put it all to use in this one, marathon of an event. And, I thought I did very well in the bar exam, but I didn't find out for like 4 months whether I passed it or not.
Oh my God.
They don't tell you until October when I took the exam in July. So whatever that is, August, September, 3 months. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a very, very long wait.
Yeah, that is. It kind of sucks.
Yeah, and I remember I knew it was coming out around the time that I was at training at Fort Atterbury, Indiana, because I was still in the Tennessee Army National Guard, so I was doing some training out there, and I was actually in an environment where we weren't allowed to have our cell phones the day that the test results were supposed to be released. Like, we couldn't have them inside because we were in, like, a secure, secret environment or whatever for the exercise we were doing. So I'd have to go out, get my phone out of the cubicle, and then go outside and check it and see, did they release the results yet or not? That sort of thing. So eventually they got released, and I remember it was a really neat experience when I came back into our tactical operations center, and I was like, I passed the bar exam, and they were like, congratulations, Paul!
Yeah! Hell yeah, dude. I mean,
that was cool.
Talk about a massive, because it's probably kind of, you've worked so hard to get just to the exam, and then it's just up in the air for 4 months. Like, that's got to be pretty, that's got to get your anxiety up or something up a little bit, you're just like, shit. Because I've had, maybe not you personally, but there's tests that I thought I've done really well that I bombed. There's tests that I thought I didn't do so hot that I actually killed it. Like I had psychology statistics, right? And that was I'd say a little bit more of a difficult class. And so I did really well actually. And but the final exam, I was like, well, I did so good the rest of these exams, like I'll still be all right. No, dude, I got the test back, got like a 98. I was like, yeah, baby,
Yeah.
I was like, I was pumped about it. I didn't think I did hot, but then there's ones that I had like all the confidence, like, earlier in school, I was like, dude, I aced that. And then it's like, no, I did not. I got to figure out how to get some extra points now, do some extra credit. But yeah, and that's just like, shoot, you find out about that within like, a few days or a week. And even that few days can be pretty stressful.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now I'm remembering what my third job in law school was, is because I started working part-time at a law firm at Cole Law Group in Brentwood as a law clerk. So it was a good experience in that I was able to work on actual real cases and do real lawyer work as a law clerk, which really the only difference I learned later is that law clerks, they're not going to be the final reviewing authority. An attorney is going to go through it and make sure whatever they're doing makes sense. Now, how close they review it and how much things they change, that's going to depend on the person you work for. But even now in my job as an attorney, it's kind of similar in that most of the cases I'm on, we've got 3 attorneys on the case, and I do the initial draft. I send it to my boss, who does some edits, and then we send it to his boss, who does the final edits, and then we send the reports out.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that's, I guess in the legal profession, it can often be that way. I enjoyed that I was doing real work for real people, learning about kind of the real way things work. But, as a system, when you're the lowest man on the totem pole, you get the lowest reward, right? Because the boss is, he's the one owning the business. So paying you, $18, $20 an hour, whatever it is. I mean, it's obviously a lot better than nothing, but it's not, I think when they bill the clients out at, $200 an hour for your work or whatever, and you're only getting $20 an hour, you can feel a little bit disgruntled about it. Yeah. It's kind of the system, the way it works. So law as an industry is really kind of like that, in that the very large law firms in America, the highest paid partner that exists somewhere is probably getting $1,000 an hour. It's an astronomical, crazy amount some of these attorneys can command.
Very decent money.
Yeah, and the only real reason they can get paid that much is because they're buddies with somebody that's going to give them the work, and they're known as like a, national level authority on whatever type of law it is. Yeah. So nobody's going to command that rate, right out of law school or something. That's a lifetime career to get to that point. But from every person like that, there's going to be other partners below them that get paid less per hour to do other practice areas. Then there's going to be the associates that are going to actually do more of the grunt work and get paid less, and the rates that they charge the clients are lower. So it's actually kind of interesting the way the business model works. And I think in the future, it may actually change a little bit, because what has allowed law firms to operate the way they have in America is that you have to be a lawyer to own the firm, which is unlike most businesses, right? Like, you don't have to be a nutrition specialist to own a nutrition company.
I have a friend that she's not a dentist. She owns dental offices.
Right? So the reason that they keep law firms away from that is because lawyers and judges are the ones that write and enforce the law. Yeah. So they have a professional self-interest in keeping things the same, especially the people that are on the mountaintop of commanding the highest billable hour rates, and judges who used to be attorneys themselves practicing law. They want to keep the system the way it is because it's worked for them. So that's what you see a lot. And obviously, if you're a law firm owner, the current system is much better for you than if the accounting firms go out and buy all the law firms and then start corporatizing law to where they want attorneys to do certain things or just only work on certain portions of cases.
Things always shift too.
Instead of having free reign over the entire thing. So I think that's going to change, because in other jurisdictions in the world, there's already a move towards non-lawyers having ownership interests in law firms. So it's something that could change with the current environment. That's part of what's going on with the system.
Do you think that's a positive change?
I mean, for the consumer, the theory is that corporatizing it more is going to make for better, kind of better systems and approaches than if the lawyers are in charge, because the lawyers are, in some ways, too self-interested in things. So personal injury law could be a good example of this. You know, we all know the Morgan and Morgans, the Bart Durhams, the Rocky McElwaneys, the ones that do a lot of advertising. It's almost impossible not to know who these people are, because you drive down the street and there's a bus with the dude's name on it. There's a billboard.
When you go down to Florida, you go down 65, Alexander, Shinahandra, or whatever. Yeah. I don't know. It's like, dude,
everywhere.
All the way up and down 65, bro. Like, I remember all the trips I've taken here when I was stationed in Panama City. Like, I can't get that guy's face out of my head.
Well, and
it's
that law firm
forever.
Still exists. I've litigated against them, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
I'm like, damn it. And then now I've gone other places. I'm like, there he is again. Just stop him.
Go away. Leave me alone,
There's
Alexander.
Something. I think it's a message. I don't know. Anyways.
Was he your attorney for your motorcycle accident?
No, he wasn't. I did some small town guys. And
that advertising, Alexander, not enough.
Not enough.
Spend more on advertising. No, I'm just kidding.
Actually, it was my dad's friend that he went to the Citadel with.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And now I think he's a judge.
Oh, neat.
I think he's a judge in Manchester.
Okay, cool.
Not sure.
Yeah.
Anyways, Bobby. Shout out to Bobby.
So I think in terms of my law experience, after I graduated from Vanderbilt, I was at Cole Law Group working primarily family law and military law, doing a little bit of business litigation type things for several years. Then I went to Hall Booth Smith, where I was for about a year and a half. And then recently I've transitioned to Fields Howell. The work I'm doing today is primarily as national level coverage counsel for one of the Lloyds of London syndicates. So Lloyds of London is the largest international insurance market for difficult to insure things. And difficult to insure things includes new and emerging technologies. So some of our clients are DoorDash, Uber, Lyft, things like that, where they're going to need a large amount of insurance because of the capacity of things that can go wrong in their business. And they obviously don't want to have to pay if there's a lawsuit and they're found liable. So, just like insurance, I think as a system is really good for society, because without that, the thing of like making a new business like Uber or Lyft would be too much of a risk for any individual.
Yeah.
So really the concept of the corporation being like back in the day, hey, I'm really rich, but I can't afford to pay for this ship, all of the crew, all of the items myself. So let me band together with like 100 people and we're all shareholders in this corporation, which is a ship venture. That's a good thing. And then the society being able to insure against risk so that businesses can take, more. They can take more things that they know there's risk involved. But they can kind of push the limits. That's good economically. You've just got to set the right parameters where it's at the right point. And I think that's kind of what it is for society. Obviously, I think politically you can make some you can definitely take different sides on the issues of, should we be getting more from our corporations in terms of taxes versus should we be taxing individual people based on their revenue? And somehow there's a giant tax loophole of like, well, the really wealthy C-suite employees, they don't get paid in salary. They get a small salary, and they primarily get paid through stock options. And what happens is, since they don't sell those stock options, technically there's nothing to tax. So as a society, there's ways to make the system, I think, more beneficial for everyone. But I do think that the current system, with the way the insurance markets are set up, is good for people, because otherwise businesses like Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, no one would be that innovative because they'd be too scared about all the lawsuits that are going to come their way. They've got to be able to get insurance. So insurance does serve a very important purpose for society that I think a lot of people overlook. And also a lot of people don't understand things like excess insurance, which is the thing I'm becoming more of an expert in, which is for bigger business ventures, you'll have a primary insurance policy, then you'll have an excess insurance policy, like what's over the primary. Sometimes it's referred to as an umbrella policy. So if you've heard of that term before, it's that. And the reason that's important is because your primary policy is only going to provide a certain amount of coverage. So an example is business auto coverage. Most businesses, like a trucking company that have a lot of people driving,
have an umbrella.
They obviously have to have, that's right. They obviously have to have first the primary policy, which in some places might be $1 million is kind of the default. And then they're going to have an excess policy, which, maybe they want insurance up to 5, 10, 20 million, whatever, whatever based on the risk, whatever they think is reasonable, whatever kind of the business environment is, that's what they're going to do.
So like the more assets you have, the higher you want your umbrella policy, because if, say, you get sued, you're going to lose a bunch of your shit as opposed to just the insurance paying about more money.
That's pretty much exactly it. And the balance is obviously with the more insurance you have, the more of the premium that you're paying, so the more costly it is to insure.
Yeah. But then better than running the risk of like losing, a bunch of the stuff you're invested in that probably add up over time,
Yeah, some of the things I've seen as an attorney, like one person told me I was involved in this consultation where I didn't actually do anything with it because I told him it wasn't going to make financial sense. They owned a private plane that was landing at the Smyrna airport, and the Smyrna runway had a sinkhole that destroyed their plane, where it's really the runway's fault because they should have known that the sinkhole was there and they should have repaired it, and they didn't. So this guy's plane just drove into the sinkhole and
damn,
there goes this $1.2 million plane. Well, they only had $100,000 worth of insurance or something, and so now they're out like $1.1 million, and then it's like, well, let's sue the airport. But Tennessee has a law that the most you can get from them is like $100,000 or something, which is wild because, and that's the way the law works. For those of you who don't know, is you can think, oh, this person's liable against me. They owe me X. If they're the government, don't forget that the government writes the laws.
It depends on the state too. Yeah.
So they can make the laws though that say you get zero. And that's one of the things about legal doctrine in general. I'll get on a little bit of a soapbox here, is that I feel like this country has said as a theory that we're going away from the aristocracy of Europe and we're going to basically create our own system. But then for whatever reason, our Supreme Court and other courts throughout history have decided to just incorporate some of the English law principles. And the one that I think is the worst from my vantage point in the modern times is limiting liability of the government, because the theory is sovereign immunity. You can't sue the sovereign. The theory actually originated with you can't sue the king. The king can do whatever the F he wants.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's good for society.
No.
It's not good for society. The king can do whatever he wants. Why would we keep that?
Yeah, no, screw that.
But our courts have honestly kept this doctrine, and they have made it where if you get injured, you can't sue the government in certain capacities. So, one example, if you're active duty military and you have a surgery, and that surgeon who does your surgery is active duty military, or is somehow connected to the military, and they kill you, your family cannot sue them for wrongful death.
Yep. It's pretty shitty.
It's crazy. And that's based on the idea of sovereign immunity. And you apply it to the military in an extreme fashion.
Yeah. That's kind of scary.
But if I was a civilian employee, same thing. I go to a civilian hospital, get a surgery. I die because the surgeon committed malpractice. My family can sue that surgeon and get, compensated for wrongful death.
Yeah. Massive amounts too. Yeah.
Well, just limited by whatever state law generally exists.
Yeah.
But it's a good system compared to you're just out of luck.
Yeah. 100%,
in the
man.
military.
That's nuts, man. Yeah, dude,
You know,
take it down, man. You're on the path to, fix it.
Well, I would like to be some of the change I would like to see in the world and find ways to improve things. It's just often when you look at the legal framework, the problem is it requires action from Congress. It requires, state legislature to do something. And it's just, how do you galvanize support to do something politically these days? It seems like it's a very difficult challenge.
Oh, no doubt.
Which I think is one of the reasons why a lot of, BS stuff that exists legally continues to exist, is because, it doesn't harm the people that have power to change it.
Yeah.
And so there's no one that has the incentives aligned to fix it. Some of the things that exist in the world, like class action lawsuits. Class action lawsuits is the best system that exists to stop corporations from doing small harms to thousands or millions of people.
Yeah.
Because without class action lawsuits, let's say you're a telecommunications company and you want to just charge the 1.9 million consumers that use your service, you want to just tack on a $10 convenience fee to everybody's bill and see if they're going to pay it. Without class action lawsuits, no one can sue you for that, because it costs me more to sue you for $10 than $10 is worth.
Yeah.
Because if I file a lawsuit anywhere in the state of Tennessee, the cheapest it is like $200 for the filing fee. So I'm not going to lose $190 suing you over $10.
Well, I'm going after Instagram.
Yeah?
I mean, I should. A lot of people said I should. I got a good case. I don't know. I'm not an attorney. Neither are they.
But class action lawsuit could be it, because the reason class action lawsuut could make sense for that
It affected my business.
Well, everyone that has, had that problem with Instagram, they could join in the same lawsuit.
And then boom.
And then maybe you have enough people where it makes financial sense for the lawsuit to be viable. That's the theory of the class action lawsuit.
Don't mess with me, Meta. One of the biggest companies in the world.
Yeah, but, I think the role of government in society is something that should constantly be questioned and updated with modern times.
Yeah.
One of the things that bothers me as an attorney is when people make the argument about what the founders intended without thinking about the consequences and applying common sense to the situation. So to me, the best example is the Second Amendment. Mm-hmm. I'm not a Second Amendment hater. I'm not someone that says no one should have guns, but I am someone that says it should be reassessed in light of the modern times. Yeah. And I think someone that says I'm an extreme Second Amendment person, or that there should be no limits to it, you're basically saying that someone should be allowed to have a .50 caliber machine gun and walk down the street with that in their hands. Why would you think that that's okay? Yeah. If someone has a .50 caliber machine gun right outside of your house, I guarantee you're not okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pro gun guy, but I'm also like, my intentions are just to protect my family and those around me. That's it. I'm not going to use it in that kind of way. If I could have, if I could reverse time or whatever, guns and bombs and stuff wouldn't even exist, because that kind of warfare I just don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah.
At least just go back to swords, man people up. No, but you get what I'm saying?
Right.
That's just, but unfortunately in the way of the world, it's because everybody has one, I have to do that in order to just had that extra security for the ones I love.
Right. But there still should be limits to it in terms of having common sense background checks where this person that's been convicted of beating their significant other, or that has
violent outbreak, yeah.
That they've committed arson, they've had serious drug crimes. Why do you want that person to have a firearm?
Yeah.
You don't want that person. Or they've been institutionalized for mental health reasons. No, that person should not get a firearm. Those things make sense. And also the limits on firearms in terms of, no, you and I shouldn't be able to own a .50 caliber machine gun because the potential for harm is too great. And it's not, you're not using a .50 caliber machine gun for self-defense in the same way you're using a handgun with a reasonable amount of ammunition.
No, I would just use something like that just to I don't know, blow shit up in my backyard. Not in my current one, but if I had a bunch of land, just be for fun with my friends. Sure. That's about it.
I got you. But the point I'm
but
making
that's,
is,
I totally get what you're saying though. It's not everybody's going to do that if that has the ability to have it. It's why?
Well, the point I want to make with it is that some people like to frame the argument this way. They like to say, well, the founders believed everyone should have firearms and that shouldn't be limited. And I'm like, okay, what the founders actually believed is that white men should be able to have firearms. And the firearms that they were talking about are you load 1 round per 30 seconds if you're an expert, 1 round per 1 minute if you're a novice.
Yeah, the founders also didn't believe in immigration and stuff like that. So
But they're mostly immigrants too, right?
Yeah, but that's the thing. But like anybody,
It's okay for us, but not others.
Yeah. So we live in a time that's not just what they wanted. Like we've had people migrate from all over the world from different beliefs and different systems and whatnot. So yeah, modern times, dude, look a lot different than then.
Well, I feel like a lot of times when I'm debating people about this, they'll say things like, well, the founders were cool with everyone having firearms. I'm like, okay, yes, they were. But everyone having firearms was white men, and the population was so much smaller then. So we're talking about tens of thousands of guns, not tens of millions of guns. Mm-hmm. So you've got an economics of scale difference problem between today and back then. But the technology, I don't think any of them in 1776 were thinking, this gun is going to turn into a machine gun that can fire 200 rounds a minute.
That can be put on a drone. That argument gets people heated. Obviously I'm a pro weapon guy. I hunt, all that stuff, but also like I have common sense. I don't think everybody should have one. That's just me. A lot of people are just like, nah, screw that, but whatever. Anyways, we're not going to get into that because that's a huge debate.
That's right.
It almost stresses me out because I see people, and I'm not here to debate, man. I've got my way of things. And
sure.
Anyways, sorry, I gotta take a deep breath. Now we've got to close this out. We've been recording for a while. This is that part 2, and you got to get to a launch and stuff. It's Sunday, but we are going to touch on. I want to hear the story you were telling me about with a client and one of your lawsuits, and then I got a final question for you, and we'll bridge out and probably reconvene one of these days again.
Sounds good, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we were talking about the time I had a client nearly go to jail, the first time I had this experience. So I've primarily practiced civil litigation. I've only got involved in criminal defense things a few times, and that was really just if I had a client that got caught up in domestic violence related to the divorce they were already going through, or one of my clients that I did a lot of business for, their son got in trouble for reckless driving, step in, try to, get him out of it as much as possible, those sort of things. So primarily I've done civil litigation. So in one case, it was a divorce case, and I met with this woman. Her husband was a major in the Air Force, so I thought because of my military background and experience, I could be helpful in a military divorce case. I had done several military divorce cases at that time. I was starting to become kind of an expert in it, but I should not have overlooked the red flag that I was her 4th attorney in the case. So This was the case where I learned I will be someone's 2nd attorney. I will not be the 3rd. I will not be the 4th in a divorce or child custody case because it's kind of like the expression, someone's doing something over and over. Is the problem other people or is it them?
Yeah,
right?
Right.
And this case taught me that.
That's one denominator.
Because the thing was, we had her deposition. So if you don't know what a deposition is where it's actually a sit-down kind of like this in terms of the lawyers here, the other opposing parties across the table, and the lawyer's going to ask them questions. It's from the popular zeitgeist, you try to get to you can't handle the truth. Right, but it doesn't actually happen.
No, it doesn't.
So there's a court reporter who's typing. There's the attorney who's asking questions. There's the deponent who's answering the questions, and usually the deponent's lawyer is there. Usually the attorney's client's there. So there's a lot of people in the room. Mm-hmm. But it's a very common, normal thing in divorce cases if you can't work it out early that a deposition occurs.
Yeah.
So I prepped my client, had like a 45-minute conversation with her about what to expect, what she's supposed to do. What kind of answers to give, not like coaching her what to answer, but just telling her these are like the acceptable limits of what to say. You can steer the conversation back to this, like remember these kind of points.
Yeah.
I'm going to be next to you to object if they ask any inappropriate questions. If I don't say don't answer the question, then you just start answering the question anyway, because the objection is just for the record, so that if they try to claim, well, you said X during your deposition, if I made an objection, maybe we can get that removed from the record if there's not a basis for that to be proper.
Okay.
So that's kind of the way the game is played. And based on what she told me, her husband had been abusive to her. So what I thought was going to happen was at the deposition, she was going to say, on this date, he did this and it was abusive. On this date, he did that and it wasn't nice to me. What she did instead, that was the most bizarre thing I've ever experienced, was the opposing attorney asked her what her address was, and she said, I plead the 5th.
Like Dave Chappelle?
Yeah, you can.
F-I-F, 5th. I plead the 5th.
And it made about as much sense as that because...
He just keeps repeating it?
Well, because the thing was, you're only supposed to use the 5th Amendment towards a question about something that implicates you criminally. Obviously, your address doesn't implicate you criminally.
Yeah.
It's never really an element of the crime. Like, did you live here? I mean, I guess maybe sort of some financial crime.
Pretty funny, actually.
Yeah, that's why it's funny, is because it's really not an applicable thing. And it's like, you just told me you were going to share your story about your husband being abusive, and now you're the one who's not answering the questions.
I just picture you in the courthouse just like, oh, shit. Or at depositions just like, oh, my God.
Yeah, so it starts in actually the attorney's office, and the attorney's office is in Nashville, literally right across from the courthouse. And she knew the judge. He'd been on the bench for a long time, and she's a really good family law attorney, so she's done a lot of divorces in Davidson County, so she knew the judge real well. So when this crazy stuff happened, she's like, okay, Paul, you and I are going to go step into my office, and we'll call the judge and have a conversation about it. Okay, that's reasonable, because that's basically the solution. If someone's acting crazy during a deposition, you try to get the judge's office on the phone and get the judge to tell us what to happen. So we get the judge on the phone, and she basically says, wife here is acting crazy by pleading the Fifth Amendment to stuff that has no Fifth Amendment implications, and she should just be answering the questions. I've told her to answer the questions. Her attorney told her to answer the questions, and he's like, okay, Paul, what do you think? And I was like, well, I like to zealously advocate for my clients, but I also have a duty of candor to the tribunal, so I can't say anything different than what she said. She relayed that very accurately to you, Your Honor. It's bizarre, Judge. I don't know why she's not answering the questions. I told her to answer the questions, but I'm not throwing my client under the bus. Obviously, I'm being professional. And so then the judge says, tell you what, here's what we're going to do. I don't have court this morning. We're going to bring her over to the courthouse, to my courtroom, and I'm going to tell her very clearly that she has to answer the questions. She'll answer the questions. We'll all go on our way. It'll be a merry day. That sort of thing. I'm like, okay. So I go talk to the client. I'm like, hey, this is what's happening. Like, the judge is going to have us go in there. The judge is going to tell you to answer the questions. So just answer the questions. And instead she says, well, I'm going to call my mom and have her go be ready to pick up my son from daycare because I'm going to go to jail today. And I'm like, why are you going to go to jail today? This doesn't serve any interest in your case. You should just answer the questions. Like, I am really not understanding where from this conversation you're getting the I should be a martyr on this. Like, you being a martyr on this doesn't help you. It just makes you look crazy, because the thing you're getting in trouble for is not answering questions. The questions that you supposedly want to answer about the lawsuit to tell about how, abusive your husband is. So we get there, the judge goes through the spiel, you got to answer the questions. There's security in the back standing 10 feet behind us. We go into the jury room because it's empty because there's no trial going on. We use that to continue the deposition. So we get maybe 3 more minutes into it, and then she refuses to answer a question. So now the judge's assistant is sitting there, and the judge's assistant says, ma'am, you just heard the judge tell you have to answer the questions. Answer the questions. And then she's like, I'm not going to. Like, I have a Fifth Amendment right, blah, blah, blah. And she's like, no, the judge told you the Fifth Amendment applies to someone asking you questions about something that implicates you criminally. The question that was just asked about what year you moved into your house doesn't have anything to do with implicating you criminally.
God almighty, dude.
So we went back into the judge's courtroom. They gave us one more chance. We go back out there. This time, she says something in the hallway like, this judge can't tell me what to do, or he can't tell me what to do. So the question the opposing attorney starts with is, ma'am, I just heard you say to your attorney, he can't tell me what to do. Who's the he you're referring to? Obviously the judge.
Oh.
And so then she again refuses to answer the question. So we go back in there, and I'm just like, man, this is the worst thing
ever. What did I get myself into?
How did I get myself into this? Like, she's probably going to stop paying us, and we're still going to have to represent her, and she's acting crazy. And I'm like, I obviously have to move to withdraw because I told her very specifically what to do, and she's not listening to my advice. So the relationship is ruined at this point. But thankfully, the judge said, this is what we're going to do. Under the Tennessee Rules of Civil Procedure, I have the ability to sanction someone who refuses to cooperate in discovery. I am interpreting your continued failure to answer questions as your intentional refusal to cooperate under Tennessee Rule of Civil Procedure number whatever. And then he read this paragraph and was like, this is what I'm doing. I'm granting the husband a default judgment in the divorce. We'll have a final hearing to do the property. And I'll allow Mr. Tennison to withdraw. I was like, yes.
Thank God.
This could have been so much worse, because I thought what was going to happen was going to be like, you're going to jail for 10 days, and we're going to bring you back to the courthouse and see if you'll answer questions then.
Hey, it's a learning lesson for you, though.
Right?
Yeah.
It was.
And you got off lucky because the judge could have, not done that.
Yeah, the judge could have kept me where I had to continue to represent her as she's acting crazy. So the fact that he let me off the hook, and also he resolved the case, which was what needed to happen, really, really bizarre sort of situation, because there's no reason for you not to answer the questions in a deposition where your attorney's there representing you and has already told you this is like the normal thing that happens. You know, it didn't advantage her in any way not to participate in the deposition. So it was
Wild.
It was very wild. And like I said, that's where I learned don't be the fourth attorney on a case.
Well, I'm glad you learned your lesson. And now you've had a lot of experience. How long ago was this?
That was probably in like 2019, 2020. So
not too long ago. No.
Well, I mean, long enough that I haven't made the same mistake.
Yeah,
so.
that's good. That's good. Well, thanks for sharing that, man. Unfortunately, we got to cut out. Dude, I appreciate your time, though. I appreciate you coming in on this beautiful Sunday. I'm supposed to storm later, though, of course. And just being here, getting to meet your wife, you know, all the things. And I'm excited for what's ahead for you, man. I'm excited for our connection. I appreciate you. And I do got one more question, though. Like, I've loved hearing your story. I've asked this question to everybody. Paul, what is your relentless pursuit?
I'd say these days it's, you know, doing the best I can to help my firm accomplish our mission of representing our clients. So that's something that I pour my energy and effort into. The other is my nonprofit ventures, so helping Operation Headshot and the Davidson County Veterans Court and Mental Health Court Assistance Foundation. I think a similar related thing to that is I do take calls from veterans where they're asking, hey, I need an attorney to tell me what I should do about this. And instead of being like, no, I don't represent you, you know, I'm not going to have this conversation, I'll usually talk to them for an hour for free. Nice. as a way to kind of pay it forward. So I think those things, and then, you know, I'm passionate about, you know, fitness, health, travel, those sort of things. So, and then the music aspect of things, you know, I want to continue to DJ, create my own music, play guitar, those sort of things. So I want to continue to be involved in that in the future. But I think my relentless pursuit, I can't really sum it up into one thing. I think it just kind of changes over time, but those are the buckets of time I'm spending the most on these days.
Beautifully said, man. I appreciate that. Well, thank you for sharing your journey, man, and sharing some stories within the journey. And like I said, you're just getting started, man. You're just excited to see where you're going, and thank you for coming in.
It's been my pleasure, Joe.
Yes, sir. Hey, until next time.